The burnout doesn't just happen in one day. It's a series of choices, specifically for me. The choices that I think I would make again and again. I would not have made different choices looking back. I would approach it differently because I had zero boundaries, but I would have made the same choices if I had possibility to do it again.
This podcast is sponsored by Pragmatic Solutions, the player account management platform chosen by today's smart betting and gaming operators. Don't let technical constraints delay you from achieving your business goals. Expand your business, boost your margins, and dominate the market in any leading regulated jurisdiction with our powerful, flexible, and secure iGaming platform. Enjoy its extensive marketing tools, compliance protection, real-time data, and a wide portfolio of over 1,000 industry providers. It's time to upgrade your technology. Let Pragmatic Solutions show you the modern approach. Visit pragmatic.solutions and join the smart thinkers.
This podcast is brought to you by Pragmatic Play, a leading game developer providing player favorites to the most successful brands across the industry. With an award-winning multi-product portfolio of slots, live casino, bingo, virtual sports, and more, Pragmatic Play is powering up new possibilities of play through one single API. Visit pragmaticplay.com and discover your favorite every time.
Bingo, bango, bongo. Tania Johannisson, sitting over in Stockholm. Great to have you on the podcast today, Tania. How are you?
Hi, Pierre. I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. All good on your end?
Everything is fantastic. This has been a podcast that is a long time coming. I've known you for such a long time, Tania, and I've always looked up to the work that you've done over at Evolution for when you were there for a long time. And you have an incredibly impressive academic and professional career. And the kind of point of the podcast that we're doing today is to talk a little bit about like the trials and tribulations of a high achiever, because you've really done the 360 kind of career tour, if you will, with an incredible academic career, an incredible high achievement career, like we're going to talk about in Evolution, and then also experiencing the downside of being that kind of high achiever on the burnout side as well, and then coming out to the other end and kind of understanding and reasoning through a lot of the challenges that you've experienced in your career. But I wanted to just kind of start off, Tania, just to ask you for a little bit more of a background of yourself. Can you talk about how did you start and how did you get to where you are today?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for the kind words. I think it's very, very gracious of you to shower me in those lovely kind words. I really appreciate it. And it's true, we've known each other for a really long time. And I was looking forward to have this conversation with you, actually. How I started, I guess, my first years of life started very ordinary, or followed rather an expected path, school, university. I'm originally from Latvia, where I haven't lived for many, many years now, but it's still my home country. When it comes to profession, started at my 20s and started as a person who always loved to learn and to grow, and I still am that person today. I almost feel like, learning is I'm a forever student. Anything I can learn, I really, really enjoy. And developing new skill sets, it's not just the progress, but it's probably one of the activities that I enjoy being in without focusing on end result. But when it comes to my career, I started at my 20s at a startup company in online gaming industry, which was completely unknown at the time, and it was supposed to be a simple summer job, and resulted into career defining journey where together with the company I progressed and developed, and the company grew to $1 billion market leader with 20,000 employees. It's been one hour ride, so it was fantastic. And I think from the very first month or years I've been with Evolution. And for those of the listeners who don't know, my primary occupation and job with Evolution was director of risk for many, many years. But in the beginning, I think I went with the flow and I embraced all the challenges. And I've done several different projects with Evo in my early days. I think it was what I call it. I think it was a perfect fit between my personality, willing to grow, eager to grow, learn, and the company's winning culture. That's why we stayed together for so many years.
Brilliant. And just to put into context of your career, of your 13 years in Evolution, from the startup to the multi-billion-dollar company that it became, I mean, if anyone remembers back in the 2019-2020 time when Evolution started to enter the US as a live casino supplier, you took the kind of interim position as the director of operation at the same time of North America, as you were also director of risk. And Evolution established a monopoly in North America as the only live casino supplier in North America for years. And that was essentially on your table to achieve that. That wasn't Evolution that achieved that. That was Tania Johannisson who achieved that monopoly in the US, essentially based on your drive and experience and expertise. And it really goes to show that sometimes a few handful individuals can really make a massive difference in a large organization. And I want to kind of continue on that note a little bit, Tania, because again, you are clearly a major high achiever, and you've done incredible work to build Evolution to where it eventually became. Can you talk a little bit more deeper into your career at Evolution? How was it to work there? How was life at Evo? And you clearly adopted Evolution as part of your identity almost for these 13 years. So I would like to just kind of dig in a little bit more to your timeline at Evolution.
Yes, as I said, I think I started with taking several projects early into my career. And I think the pivoting moment in my career came when I was asked to build a fraud department. And that was something that didn't exist. So I think that's where the things escalated for me in terms of the growth. But it's true that later on, as my responsibilities grew, I did take a 1-year temporary assignment with North America. And as much as you portrayed it being my achievement, of course, it's not. It's a shared one. It's an amazing people that worked together with me, and we work together because that's also part of Evolution values, right? We do things together and we try together. So it's a sense of community and belonging, which for me personally is also very, very important, on top of culture and how we work. So it was a joint effort when it comes to North America. It was, I think for me, it was specifically and particularly interesting because after 10 years of living and breathing Evolution in Europe and building the concept, establishing, pretty much developing the industry, it kind of becomes a second nature. And I think it can be like that with different things. When we exercise and we practice the same thing over and over again, it's not common sense. It becomes, as I said, as a second nature. So when you enter a new market like US, and you realize that you have to build everything from scratch, and it's not awareness of what the concept is. So I actually got to relive the early years of Evolution in Europe, which was so much fun. And, building a team from scratch, working with them through Evolution values and qualities has been a great journey for me. But I think the challenge for me there was that I was in a way wearing two hats, because whilst I did take an operational role for the North America continent, I didn't give up on my risk role. So very often I would sit in meetings wearing two hats, which for most of the times I think it's actually play to advantage. But of course, personally, it was sometimes difficult for me.
Yes. And how did you feel that your identity was shaped during the course of your time at Evolution? I mean, again, just to put in context, you started at Evo as a summer job, right? And then eventually it grew and it kind of became part of your identity. You were driving Evo to new heights and so on. How did your kind of professional identity change during this time, and even your personality?
You know what I believe? I think that when we are about an identity, and it's a fascinating topic, I think, whether it's your identity, whether it's something you're born with, whether it's something that you develop, can you change it? Do you need to change it? Right? What is the strengths, the weaknesses of being, oh, this is who I am. But I think what I believe, like when we are born, of course, there are certain aptitudes or like talents that every person is predisposed. But essentially, over time, there are beliefs, the ways of working, the ways of being, the ways of living, behaviors, patterns are being kind of taught into us. You know, they're being parented in, schooled in, churched in, whatever the environment. So I think it's a combination of predisposition, but also the environment you are exposed to early into your life or later. So, and when you have a predisposition to something, I think you are kind of attracted to find external environments or conditions that suit you. And I think the company with its winning culture was exactly that match. That's where I felt like this is my comfort zone. We're like perfect fit. So, as I said, that's why I stayed so long. But I think that was not the hardest thing, though, to navigate life or professional life while being part of Evolution. I think where it gets tricky is when you maybe start exploring different things, or you want to move on somewhere to follow different path. I think that's where it becomes challenging, because you've built such a strong attachment. This is such a strong match. So how do you pivot from there?
Yeah, it's almost like a relationship, isn't it, to some extent?
It's exactly what it was. And I mean, I don't want to say it because I don't want to portray perhaps an unhealthy picture of relationship of employee with the company, but that's exactly how it was for me. And given my pool and disciplines where I excel, which is math, statistics, and analytics, I need structure to work. But I'm also very, very high on symbolic frame. Like I need that sense of belonging. I love this big picture goals, feeling that you are doing something more than just for yourself. Yeah.
And then, so 13 years at Evolution, you and Evolution grew together, let's say, because you helped shape Evolution, just that Evolution helped shape you to some extent, I would imagine. And towards the end, I suppose, you were working an incredible amount of hours, trying to contribute where you could and do the best that you can. And that eventually then led to an unsustainable kind of working environment for you. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and then what it eventually led to you exiting Evo?
Yes, of course. I think, as I said, I mean, the journey has been incredible, full of growth, opportunities to innovate, also healthy challenges. And I loved my job. I couldn't wait to get up and do my job. I loved the people I worked with. I was moving countries. I got to travel a lot. I was working on exciting projects. And I think the piece of innovation was really, really something that I enjoyed in my job. And I think for many, the area of risk management is kind of rigid, but you can actually make it creative and fun. You can innovate out of limitation. So, but that's how I operated for many, many years. And as you said, loved every day. It was the rhythm, 24/7 rhythm, that actually I never felt like I was exhausted. Yes, maybe sometimes you're tired, it's normal. But that landscape actually fed me with more energy. And that's how it's been for many, many years, until it was a moment where something started to shift. I started feeling it, and it started as a very quiet whisper. This initial curiosity, is there anything else out there? When you don't know anything else for 13 years, you and you're ticking off the boxes. Yeah, I've achieved this, great, moving on. Is there something else out there? And so I started contemplating about other possibilities. What else can I do? And I also felt like the director of risk role, as much as it was important and impactful, it didn't stretch me enough as it did before. So I wanted, we were all like dopamine junkies. We need a higher dose. Like I wanted that bigger development, bigger learning. The pace was not fast enough for me. But then pandemic hit. And all of a sudden, we're moving to work from home. The boundaries were totally blurred. And that's where I started feeling stagnation, surprisingly enough. So what I did, well, I picked up a new hobbies, some of them really fun. I moved countries. I enrolled into MBA program with the Stockholm School of Economics. I took another job with Evolution, all in pursuit of getting that additional knowledge and learning that would, develop me even further. And it kept me busy for quite some time. I got the learning that I needed, but the quiet voice was still there. What else is there? What else is there? Is there anything? I think at the end, when I finally left, it wasn't about looking for that new challenge anymore. As you said, between my main job and in North America and MBA with Handels, I was clocking 80 hours weeks. So at the time when I left, it was pretty much about very, very needed break to spend time with my family, but also to recover. And as you mentioned, I did have a burnout that I was trying so hard to ignore. So I left to figure out why it happened, what can I do with it, and how can I change my way of living, working, so that it never happens again.
Did you recognize approaching the burnout that it was a burnout that was about to hit you? Because I would imagine, not having felt that feeling before and associating yourself as a high achiever, you kind of think that this is maybe something I'll just work through, or it's just maybe, I don't know. How did you think when you were approaching that burnout? Now in retrospective, you think back.
Well, in retrospective, I have the exact list of symptoms that I was exhibiting, right, that would suggest the burnout. But at the time, I think, not as a high achiever, not only I didn't think that it would happen to me, because everyone around, I think it was that time of life where everyone talked about burnout. It was kind of around you, but I was like, oh, it's never going to happen to me. Not only that, I actually didn't believe in burnout as such. And
Classic.
and I was like, I don't have time for burnout. What do you mean? We push through. We do this. But I think the reason why I didn't believe, or many people still don't believe in burnout, because I think it's very difficult to relate to burnout unless you have experienced it yourself. When you interact with people who has burnout, they look and they appear healthy and normal from the outside, while in fact you don't know what's going on the inside. And I think that is also the factor that contributes into burnout being rather isolating experience, because people can't relate. They don't understand. You seem normal. You seem okay. So, but I've contemplated a lot on why it happened. And, in retrospective, all the symptoms were there. And some of them actually rather disturbing symptoms, I think. Something that I didn't expect. The irritability was there, and it's not irritability of being just frustrated in a day. It's irritability. It's this very strong reaction to everything that pings and dings. Doesn't matter whether work, family, friends, it's just the phone pinging or dinging, something is needed your attention. It's just the beginning, but then we talk about withdrawal from social interactions. Like, you just have no energy for this. You are completely checked out. Physically you're somewhere, but mentally it's all about work. So I actually had, at the end, I had no mental switch. Literally, I had none. I could be physically doing one thing, but my brain always focused on work. The only time I had a switch is when I would sleep. so it was, but I think for me, person who, is very analytical and build career on number, being very rational, logical. I think there were times where the cognitive confusion came into present. When you feel like scheduling an internal meeting requires so much mental effort that you can't explain. It's like all of a sudden it's a, live or die project. It's because your prefrontal cortex is so overloaded and your mind, body system and your stress response system is so off that you can just navigate a very simple, daily activities. So that was hard.
Was there that point for you where that kind of cognitive overload came crashing down, let's say? Because the classic, I suppose, stories that you hear around burnout is that one day you wake up and you just can't get out of bed. Was that the type of burnout that you experienced, or was it different for you, more gradual perhaps?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, because you hear a lot. It's like one day you just wake up and you can't get out of bed. I think for me it was more of a build up, and I think thankfully I never reached a point where I couldn't get out of bed. But I did end up in ER 3 times in 6 months. So that was a disturbing point for me. It's like, okay, my body is collapsing, something is wrong. So
Your body is telling you.
Yes. So I think I jumped out of agony probably the last second. It didn't reach the point of me not being able to get up of bed, thankfully.
Yeah, so your body was giving you these signals, and then, very close to that kind of final stage, let's say, you realize that you are clearly not approaching a healthy environment here. So then was there a point where you decided, I need to do something about this? You had like a moment of revelation where you decided to focus inwards instead. What was the turning point for you, Tania?
I think the interesting thing with the burnout is that you realize because it's not, for me, it wasn't one day, right? Yesterday I didn't have a burnout, but today I do. You go through it for some time.
It's like the boiling frog.
Yeah, and you're just trying to push it away. And I kind of like boiling frog, or like if you imagine you having a glass full of water and someone next to you stands with a carafe trying to put more water, so you kind of need to take a sip before the new water comes in. So, and it goes, that exchange goes faster and faster. At some point you don't have time to take that sip out of it, so the glass gets over flooded. But I think I realized rather early that I need a change. And I think, should I not have been going through burnout, I would be able to implement the change. But when you're already there, change requires a lot of cognitive efforts. and change is always hard. And when you're already depleted, even though you with your whole being understand, I need a change, it's so hard that the load that you're carrying is actually easy to continue carrying rather than implementing something new.
Right, that's the paradox, isn't it? That change is hard, whatever it is. Yeah, so that those kind of pathways that you build neurologically, where you do the same thing every day, you get into a pattern and a routine. It's easier to stay in those patterns rather than carving out a new pattern, which is more healthy. Let's say it's that like short-term investment that takes a lot of energy from you that you might not have then, so it's easier to wake up the next day and just do the same thing. But I mean, it's an enormous challenge to overcome that than I would imagine if you're a person who is approaching burnout, even if you recognize it maybe.
Yes, it's hard. And I mean, I think I probably should have a disclaimer here. I'm not a certified burnout, person, and I only speak from my own experience. And I know that some people experience burnout perhaps differently. The root cause for burnout is also different for many people. For me, it was primarily professionally induced, and I think I've spent a lot of time to understanding why I reached the burnout. And it was not about long hours, actually, as some people
really?
may. Yes, as
It wasn't about the 8-hour week.
no, it was not. For me personally, it was, because I worked 24/7 for many years before. And as I said, it actually gave me energy. But then something started to shift. And I think what happened is that early in my careers, every single hour was accounted for. Like it was contributing into that bigger picture, bigger vision. It all made sense. But then when you internally start to question whether there is something else out there, do I want to do this for 5 years? Do I want to do this for 10 years? Okay, no. And then you don't know what else do you want to do. Then it becomes problematic. Then all of a sudden, these many hours you're putting in, you can't really justify. They're not, the present efforts are not sort of contributing into your future self. And I think that was my biggest challenge. It was not about the hours. It was about, I wanted something else and I didn't know what it was.
Right. So it's kind of like this classical saying, like if you work with what you love, you don't have to work for a day in your life. Like, but because when you do something that you're really passionate about, it just gives you energy. Like you said, you can do it forever. But when you then kind of mentally check out from that position and you still contribute with the same amount of hours, it just becomes a negative spiral instead, kind of thing.
Yeah, if you do it for a long time, absolutely. I'm not saying that, we can love our job. And I think, we're humans. We can all go through periods where like, oh, can't do this, I'm tired. And I think it's, if you feel like you're tired and exhaustion is not burnout, because if it was, we wouldn't need a word for burnout. I think it's very interesting. And you hear a lot people say, well, I feel burnout, I'm going to go on vacation for 2 weeks. I think if you feel that way, I think it's fantastic because I think if you get to go on vacation for 2 weeks and you come back on a Monday, 2 weeks later, and you feel re-energized and you feel once again that drive and passion for the job that you do, well, then you're not burnout. Then it's fantastic news. It's just exhaustion. Because if it is burnout, and again, I'm talking about professionally induced burnout, if it is a burnout, you coming back on Monday, 2 weeks later, will get you to that state right away. Because it got you there in the first place.
Right. So once you experienced this, Tania, and you kind of started to come out the other side, you have a very impressive academic background. And the way you kind of got your head around this was to dive into the books, right? And I think you particularly got really interested in neuroscience at this time. Can you talk about how you approached, diving into the books and what you learned around that time when you're trying to understand this?
Yes, of course. I think the first time I really decided to dive into neuroscience was during my recovery. So I left my job and decided to, you know, make the resilient life, so to speak, to understand why it happened, searched within, okay, what can I do with it? And that's where I realized how much power our brains hold over our response to the external world, our bodies as well. So long into my recovery, where, the physical symptoms from burnout, because the physical symptoms from burnout can also be, how as we go through our life, we respond to external conditions through fight or flight response. And it's our response to stress factors. And sometimes physically we can have, heart palpitation. If you go to a very important presentation or talk, you can have this adrenaline rush, which is very, very healthy. But it's a response to an external trigger. I recognized that my stress response system was completely off. I could be driving a car to a very relaxing, massage appointment, and I could feel this gush of adrenaline over me. I could have a heart palpitation. So it was a completely off. So I started thinking about what it is, because physically I was healthy. I did all my checks. I was physically healthy. So I started thinking, what is it? And I discovered that it's my brain that just literally continued sending those signals, because that's what it used to be doing. So that's how I got into neuroscience. Started pretty much learning of what effects the burnout has on brain, and it's actually physically changes our brain, which is very, very scary. As I said, it affects our emotional systems, emotional response. It's, we have this part in the brain called the hippocampus, which is responsible for learning and memory. And the burnout, this chronic stress, which induces the cortisol into our body, it's actually poison for us. And a chronic stress damages that part of our brain. So not only we're not creating new cells as this hippocampus part is supposed to, it's actually killing everything. So we lose a sense of motivation for the future. We can't navigate the simple daily activities. So that's how I got into it. I was very determined to, take back control of my thoughts, of my brain. I was determined to heal mentally and, build up somewhat a healthy mind diet that would not only allow me to recover, but will ensure that I never find myself in a similar situation again.
Right. And speaking about this topic, are there any particular triggers that you should be mindful of when it comes to being in this very unsustainable place? Because stress itself perhaps is not the culprit here, right? If you're stressed at work, maybe that will make you more focused and sharp and so on. But you mentioned, for example, that you would get these stress responses when you were not in a stressful situation. So does that mean, for example, that if you get a stress response when your brain should be relaxed, that is not a good sign, for example? Can you talk a little bit more perhaps about just the brain's responses when you are in this unsustainable place, and maybe if there are any kind of triggers that you should be mindful of to think about?
Yeah, I think brain science is a fascinating thing, and I'm not even close of being an expert here. It's just something that sparks my curiosity. But I think if you're in a point where your stress response is off, I don't think that will be the first sign. There will be some other ones, milder, simpler. And I think it's very important for us to listen to those. Not wait until, where it becomes physical. Because physical exhibits of burnout or overstress, chronic stress, it's almost like the last kind of instance in your body screaming, okay, now is enough. But I think what's interesting is that when we talk about high achiever and the burnout, it's this type of personality can actually be not maybe explain, but can shed more light of how our brains are designed being that way. So it's actually the interaction for specifically for type A or high achievers, as we call them. It's actually it lies in the heart of brain stress response system, the one that you asked. And it's interaction between our amygdala, which is emotional response, fight or flight, and the prefrontal cortex, our brain CEO responsible for thinking, problem solving, pretty much all the heavy duty thing. So for type A personalities, that interaction actually, and that the amygdala, the emotional response, is more reactive. You can see that it reacts more. So this is where, we can leverage it as strengths, because you do become more focused. You do become more productive. But if you are in this constant chronic stress, this is where your emotional response, being reactive, actually can harm you.
Right.
So I think to tackle this is something I call the neuroplasticity. It's our ability for brain to adapt. So I think it's very important that we teach our brain to handle stress before and build the resilient minds. And I'm not going to say anything revolutionary. It's quite simple things, physical exercise, mindfulness, because I feel like as you go through life, there are more and more stressful factors coming in. It's not getting any easier. It's those simple things that actually go a long way.
Right. And thinking then about this label that you had as a kind of power woman with this high achiever status that you had, you were known for perhaps being the person who was reliable within your organization and who other people could fall back on, and so on and so forth. We have a mutual friend in Carolina Pelk, obviously, who also went through this incredibly stressful environment, building her organization with a knife against her throat for some years, and then coming out of that positively. In her case, she was able to sell the company, but then facing this realization coming out of the other side, that now all of a sudden this constant little dopamine hits that you get on a day-to-day basis is now taken away from you, and just sailing into the sunset as a successful startup entrepreneur who made an exit. It doesn't necessarily exist for a personality type like that, but it is then coming out on the other side and then learning how to slow down as a person who had been teaching its brain to be at 150% capacity every day for 13 years, in your case, perhaps. So can you talk about then realizing that you need to slow down, but then actually taking the steps to do it? How was that process for you?
Hard.
Very difficult.
It was hard. And I think my journey started with when I exited Evolution and I started focusing on myself. And as you pointed out, that job was my identity. Have you noticed that, when you meet new people and you ask them, what do you do? And they answer with, I am, which is not what you're doing. You're associating your work with your identity. It was, I am that, I am this. So I'm very mindful of answering questions, who I am and what I do these days. But I think it was very hard because there was a lot of external pressure as well. What's the next big thing, Tania? Or you left now? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? So I just had to learn how to be. And I think for the first time in my life, I didn't have any goals. I didn't have any intention. I didn't have to-do lists. I just had to learn how to be. And it was hard because I was inside of me. I was still running. I felt like I needed to do something. What do I do? So, but everything, I'm a strong believer that you can build any skills you want if you just practice it. So it came with practice. In the beginning, it was hard. I had the support, people around me, people I call Team Tania, who helped me through this time, just, for accountability, for support. Sometimes I would just I would just need to talk to someone without getting any advice, just to get it out. And what I realized was that, and I'm nowhere near, I think, having it fixed. I think it's a continuous learning again, right? But I think, to answer your question, I think realization and awareness of certain things is a wonderful place to start. And then you just keep on practicing. But work with me on this concept. And we talked about high achiever and how to all of a sudden be and not to do. And I think we can land on a very powerful realization that would help people to navigate, because being a high achiever is not our goal, right? So that's how we navigate, how we get things done. And all of us have our own image of the future, our own objectives, things we want to achieve. And very often I think that we feel like we are driven by that big picture, while in fact perhaps we're more driven by the need to solve the problem to get there, which essentially is being driven by somewhat an underlying belief about ourselves. So let's take an example. For example, I don't know, we want to get a new job or promotion, whatever it is. It's like, all right, this is what I want to do. This is my future goal. And as a high achiever, what do you do? Or not a high achiever, everyone, I guess. You put in a to-do or steps to take to get there. Like, all right, maybe I need to develop these skills. Maybe I should show myself better in this smaller project so that the company gives me a bigger project so I get a promotion. Maybe I need to get new certification, or maybe I need to do this, maybe I need to do this. So you create this path for yourself. Choose things to do. But once you've sort of lined everything out like that, you're creating your own new current present identity. Because if you say, I need to develop these skills, it means that in the present, you don't have those skills. And I think the first question is, how do you operate out of the state when you don't have anything? And it doesn't necessarily have to be, I don't have this. What essentially it means, like, I'm not good enough. Like, at this point, I'm not good enough to get the promotion. I need to do something to get it. And it can be like getting fit. Like, okay, at the moment, I'm not fit. I need to do this to get there. So you're creating this identity of either not being enough, not being good enough, not being interesting enough. If you're like, if you want to change industries, I come from this industry. Who will want to work with me in that industry, right? How am I relevant? I'm not perhaps relevant. But what it suggests, I think, is that we are stuck in a loop that we can never escape, especially as a type A personalities. Because once you create this identity, as a high achiever, you're going to get it there. You're going to execute on those steps. And as soon as you get closer to your future vision, something will happen, because your identity will be very scared, because it will understand, all right, he or she is soon going to hit those goals. And me as an identity of not having enough, I'm just going to die, right? So I need to find something to survive. So it all makes sense. So here you have a new thing. And you may say like, well, Tania, but high achievers achieve great things. And it's true. But the question is it ever enough? And that is, I think, scary realization. Scary to my core, that actually acts as a major trigger for me to revisit life, how I live, how I work. Because to live out of the place of not enough constantly, it's, not only scary, but how can you be happy if you constantly feel not enough?
It's kind of like the mindset where if I just can achieve this,
yes,
then I will be happy.
Absolutely.
Right? And if you ask people in general, I think anyone on the street, if you ask them, how much money do you need to be happy? Most people will say, well, if I had around double, then I would be happy. But it doesn't matter what the starting point is, right? If they have a lot or a little, if I had double, then I would be happy. But then when they do have double, then of course the next goal is to have double again. But you're saying that, maybe the key is to take a deep breath and look at your life and perhaps appreciate what you have today.
I think the appreciation for what you have today absolutely needs to be there. Because as I said, as our demands grow, it will be more and more challenging. As more we succeed in life, the more expectations we're going to place. So, and it feels like it's something that we can't escape. But also, I think it's valid to ask ourselves whether we need to escape this structure. I think this structure has worked for many people for a long time, including myself. So I'm not saying that we should escape it, but the realization and appreciation and gratitude for what you have today is very, very crucial. Because then if you operate out of the place of having everything you need today, that is a much more empowering position to create more impact, more success in the future, because you already have everything you need in a sense today.
I'm curious to ask you a little bit on the high achiever mindset, if this is a nature or nurture type of question, or maybe it's a mix of both, because in the society we live at today, just looking at social media and the content that we are presented with, there's very little content about slowing down, but there's a lot of content about speeding up and reaching your potential. And this is how kind of the culture in the West especially is looked up upon these days, is, be your maximum self. You can accomplish anything, do maximum what you can do with your life. But there is a backside of that as well, which is, of course, that you will never feel like you have enough. And I think maybe that could potentially be a cultural phenomenon as well. But I'm curious to know, Tania, from what you learned from neuroscience in the high achiever personality type, nature versus nurture.
Yeah, I think it's a sweet spot. I think it's a combination, because for type A personality, you do see a different chemical reactions in the brain. Actually, it is how our emotional systems with the prefrontal cortex work. It is different, but then on top of it, when you get to practice things, that's kind of a natural ability becomes stronger. So you feed into it, you practice to it, and essentially that's why we say this is who I am. And I think it's a combination between two things.
Right. And so, Tania, coming out of this, then you learned a lot. You delved into neuroscience, and you eventually managed to recover from the burnout. How did you then start to pursue life, let's say, post-burnout, let's say?
Well, I think that for the first year, I actually pursued life one day at a time, and it was amazing. I, regaining the excitement for the next day, when the day didn't have anything on the schedule but taking a walk, exercising, just being. Once you get through, this initial chatter of external expectations, and do you have to take a job again? What do you do? After you kind of get through that and you filter out and you stop caring actually what people will think if, let's say, you quit your job and you don't do anything else. So once you get that out of the window, it's actually wonderful to have the feeling where you look forward to the next day, when the day doesn't bring anything specific. It's just looking out the window, having a cup of coffee in the morning, watching the sunrise, watching the sunset. It's great. But I always, there's these words that come to me, and it's a wise man that I personally know. I'm not gonna name him, but when I started, well, I think in the eyes of others, when I started to live my life a little bit differently, I said, well, this is a new Tania. This is who I am now. I'm, nature. I love this. I love that. He said, well, Tania, machine is always a machine. I was like, I was like, no. He's like, well, it's true. Of course, you need some oil to run it. You'll find it. And, 1.5 years later to my recovery, I was like, all right, what can I do now? So enrolled in a few educations. My brain regained the capacity and the need to learn. Once again, I got into this. I just wanted to learn things just for the sake of learning. Love it. So that's where I understood, all right, I'm back. I recovered. Yes, I will approach things differently. And I think I want to be very clear. And as I said, the burnout doesn't just happen in one day. It's a series of choices, specifically for me. The choices that I think I would make again and again. I would not have made different choices looking back. I would approach it differently because I had zero boundaries. But I would have made the same choices if I had possibility to do it again. Yes, and it all started with a simple question. What do I want to do? Where I want to be? How I want to do it? And I think you kind of create this unnegotiables for you. You don't focus perhaps on one career or end result in your personal hobbies or ambitions, whatever those are. But I think you create this softer, unnegotiable items like, all right, I want to have my freedom. I want my life to be, I can be in control. Where I work, what I do, I want to have time. I want to prioritize my training, for example. I want to make sure that my life it's filled with different, that it will be psychologically rich. It's a concept that everyone talks about these days, especially in scientific and academia world. It's a concept of 3 different lives: happy life, meaningful life, and psychologically rich. And it doesn't mean that, very often that these lives never intersect. They run in parallel. Maybe you have a happy life, but maybe it doesn't feel meaningful to you, or you have a meaningful life, but you don't feel happy. And this psychologically rich, with all the emotions and drama and, healthy excitement. So I think you create this picture of how you want to feel. And then you take you be patient. I think patience is what I struggle the most, because I needed things yesterday. And I think that is the trait that I'm currently practicing on developing, just to be patient, because it takes time.
Is that connected, do you think, to this kind of like need for constant dopamine hits and so on? And then also looking back on that particular topic, for someone like you who have gone through this high octane career and that identify as a high achiever, do you feel now, going into your career once again, that building defense mechanisms against letting that go too far is kind of like the key for you? Like, you need to be kind of more aware than most people of your ability to go to that extreme extent where it's too far, let's say. And is that also for, let's say, younger individuals who identify as high achievers? Is that kind of like those type of, let's say, defense mechanisms? Is that important to be aware of, let's say? Just curious to hear.
Absolutely. And I don't think me having to experience burnout, I necessarily need to be more aware than any other high achiever who hasn't. Exactly. I think, if anything, I feel like I'm so much more aware that I will probably pick up on the very first things. While the person who has never experienced it, I think that's where danger is, because you don't know what you're kind of looking at. I definitely think that the burnout doesn't put a stain on you. It's actually, if you want to flip it, it's a strength, right? Because, don't get me wrong, I do not recommend it. Avoid it at all costs. But, if you are in it and if you recovered, it's an amazing wake-up call to just rethink your life and build it in a resilient way and make it more holistic and healthy. But when it comes to younger minds, I mentor master students in universities these days, and very, very ambitious people who's, line up careers and do one of different things. And I recognize myself in them almost every time. And it's, how you see how they just dive into this, many of them use this metaphor of like being a cat. Well, it's a tough period, but I always get up. I always land on my feet, and it's scary because you don't want to kill that drive, right? Because you're far into your journey and you experience things. So you need to be supportive, but also hopefully plant some seeds that they would be attuned to external conditions, because maybe in 15 years you don't land on your feet anymore. Maybe something shifts. But that's not to say I come from experience where I feel like if you know why you're doing this, if you have your goal, I don't believe in 9 to 5s. I believe if I want to work today on a Saturday, I will gladly do that if it gives me pleasure or joy. I mean, I'll do it.
Yeah. And that's perhaps the unique insight from someone like yourself who really loved being in that environment, and then also experiencing the backside of that, of course, because I think you have a much more realistic view in the sense that, if you are a high achiever, you're not going to be working 9 to 5. If you can set up a system for yourself where you can work sometimes these ridiculous hours, let's say, but still be aware of the potential backside that can come from that, and find that like really difficult balance where you can't have that output, but also avoiding the downside of that. That is kind of the key. The key is maybe not to remove yourself from being a high achiever, right? And that's where it becomes really nuanced and really difficult, right? To come up with let's say read one book and you have cured yourself from all of this. It's very, very difficult and very individualistic, I would imagine, as well.
For sure.
Every situation is different.
For sure. And I think this short-term dopamine that you're talking about, and I think that is one of the key areas that high achievers should also be aware of and try to move away from. I think it's more important to focus on longer, more fulfilling, sustainable success that would actually bring you that meaning, because the short-term result it's very different. And as I said, when we move now, I'm so into business development with my new company, and you need to be able to have your eyes on a bigger picture, even though in short term perhaps it's hard and you don't get a sense of reward today right away, right? So it's an investment, and I believe it's a lot of businesses that build the same way, and constantly reminding yourself what is the long-term goal.
Right. And so Tania, you mentioned now that you started a new business, so you become an entrepreneur, which in itself is not the easiest path to take, of course, and the trials and tribulations that comes with that type of journey is not the easiest, of course. Can you talk about the company that you have founded now in Amplific? What do you do these days, and how do you see kind of meaning from that type of career path that you are now moving on to? And do you see the kind of, pursuing the entrepreneur path obviously comes with risk on its own. Do you see this also as a risky path from that extent, or do you feel like you got it?
I see risk everywhere, Pierre. So this is who I am. So
that's your career.
I probably even see risk where there are no risks. So I'm very good at that.
Touché.
But I think it's once again, and my company is very, very, very new. It's something very exciting to me. It's something I want to try. Of course, I see risks, but I think I am landing, or have landed already, on once again a perfect match between my passion, my expertise, my capabilities within the risk framework. Because my company is pretty much focusing on helping companies to leverage restrictions and limitations like risk and compliance and actually turn it into the enabler for the business, improve profitability, revenues, drive innovation, accelerate performance. But there is also a need, an opportunity in the market for this mindset right now. So that's where that match is coming from. It's something that I'm very passionate about, something that I've done for a long period of time. Something that I feel like I have a different mindset of navigating. Because surprisingly, in my 13 years of risk career, I only said no one time, and that's true. And I never felt as a person who, or as an employee who would only bring bad news to the management, because I know that how many people feel that way. I saw this as an amazing opportunity to do different things, because I feel like out of the limitation, there are a lot of opportunities to drive innovation. And the market is changing now. So I saw this opportunity as well. Everyone talks about this. It's a trend coming in. We do need a bigger, more major shift to take back control rather than moving along with complying with things, but actually leveraging it to perhaps build tech, build solutions that our competitors cannot, and to increase competitive advantage on the market. And that's what my company is designed to help other businesses to do. So it was born out of the passion, desire to show that risk can actually be a wonderful business enabler.
So in a way, your career is kind of coming full circle in a way now with all the experience that you have from building the risk department of Evolution, taking all that knowledge and experience like you have personally as well through building a high octane career, and now taking everything that you learned into the new Amplific business and continuing the work that you have done until date. It must be a great feeling to go full circle.
It is a great feeling, and I feel like it's also stretching me a lot. You know how it is. You no longer have this powerhouse behind you. You don't have to work on business development, and here you do. So I feel like I'm growing as a person and as a professional, and but very much driven by the impact and value I can offer to others. I think that's my beacon here.
And what is the ultimate goal with the company, would you say? What's your vision?
The ultimate goal, and I already told you, I'm driven by a symbolic frame a lot. So I like big, I like big things. I like big ideas. I think the ultimate goal is to change global perceptions of what risk and compliance are, and it's not what many industries feel like it is today. So,
Final question for you here today, Tania. I usually ask where people or companies see themselves in a couple of years, and it's interesting to tie the conversation together with this question. If you were to make a prediction where you and the company are in 3 years' time, where would you say that would be?
Well, I'm hoping that my contribution would result into creating tangible values for businesses. And I'm also hoping that the learnings and the outcomes can be tied into education, because as much as I believe in helping the existing businesses to flip the narrative and leverage what they've always found being a restrictive factor, I believe in developing this new skill set from scratch, and that's where I think academia plays the role. Building that leadership mindset that automatically is able to, entering the new working environment, automatically be able to break down silos between control functions and the business and the product, and run the organizations in a holistic overall way for maximized performance.
Brilliant, Tania. This has been an absolutely fantastic conversation. I think to kind of tie things up a little bit, the kind of concept of approaching burnout, as you point out, it's not that it's a weakness to burn out. Like, we all have the precursors to burnout under the wrong circumstances, let's say. And I think especially amongst men, there is this kind of cultural upbringing where we are taught to fight through things, and if you have any negative emotions, you kind of brush them aside and don't worry about them. These are weaknesses that you shouldn't let your mind be tainted by, and so on and so forth. But I think the new generation mindset that is appearing is more like strength is actually understanding your limitations and realizing and knowing when it's time to say stop or take a step back, because it's much harder actually to stop when you're in this high octane environment than what it is to continue. And I think that's what you point out as well. So I think this is a really good podcast just to build those defense mechanisms, understand what strength is, right? And to try to build up these defense mechanisms against burnout, like you have done, Tania. Very inspirational.
Wonderfully said, Pierre.
Well, thank you so much, Tania. It's always great to spend time with you, and I'm looking forward to see you back on the circuit again.
Oh, thank you so much, Pierre. I really enjoyed it.